Everybody, this is David coming to you today from, as you could tell, the empty walls of my office. I made a note earlier this week that I was kind of under the weather, so sorry about giving you a warmed up version of last term's video. I did want to talk just briefly today because I'm grading your papers on your case studies on bias, and I wanted to make a few comments on this. I was going to just type them in and send them out, but I thought it would be better if I could just chat with you a bit about it. One of the things that I've noticed, and this has been on almost every paper, and this doesn't surprise me, by the way, because this happens every time, is that when you talk about bias in your paper, many of you speak about bias from the perspective of bias towards an individual. And so that could be the individual based upon their beliefs, the individual based upon their appearance. Are they tall, short, skinny, large? A bias against their attitudes. Maybe they don't believe the same things that you believe and they have an attitude about it. A bias against the geography of where that person's from, or even bias against their ethnicity. And so this obviously is one area of bias that we all encounter. However, one of the things that I think is really troubling today in today's dialogue is the bias, regardless of what that it is, gets attached to the individual versus the idea. And so if you think about bias against an idea, how can we in today's highly charged political environment not transfer that bias against an idea or a belief to that individual? Because many times we just simply disagree. You may talk with someone who has a particular viewpoint on abortion that may be a pro-life or a pro-choice piece. And then somehow that individual gets attached the label versus the idea. And that's where I think we run into problems with bias today, because people get so engaged and the dialogue becomes so heated that it gets transferred from the concept to the individual. I hope that is making sense to you. And so it's very difficult to do. And one of the key things that I hope you're going to be able to do in a critical thinking environment is to make sure that you attach certain things to the proper place. Okay? So if you don't agree with someone based on something, then why is it that you're pounding on that person versus having a legitimate debate on that particular idea? And so bias is not just against the individual, it's against the idea. And so make sure that you begin to think about those. And then a second thing, as I'm reading through your papers, you'll notice that I'm throwing the fact or opinion flag out on almost every paper. And I'm doing that for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's the perfect time to do that because this is a paper on bias. And so unless you have supported opinion to something, you cannot make a definitive statement. It turns out to be opinion versus fact. So some of you have used these phrases. This particular thing will, or this particular thing is, or every time something is, or every time something happens. And so unless you're using a source to back up that opinion, unless you're using a peer-reviewed source to back up that opinion, you can't say those definitive words like is, all, will. Instead, you need to use words like may. May is always a great word to use in these because, again, you don't have to prove it. Okay? But if you use those definitive words in your writing, then you have to prove it. And if you don't, then it just shows bias in writing. Okay? So make sure that as you begin to look at these things, that you have a real focus on fact versus opinion and begin to get those definitive words of will and is and all and every and all of those things. Make sure that you try and remove those from your writing unless the source you have says it. If the source you have that you've researched says it that way, then you can source it that way and you can say it that way. Otherwise, I'll throw the fact or opinion flag out on you, and in doing so, it just shows that there's bias in your writing. Okay? I hope you all have a great week. I just wanted to send this one out because I just think this one is such a critical piece in critical thinking going forward. All right? Take care. Have a great rest of the week.